This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the February 21st edition of the DRF Players Podcast, show 214, I believe. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale, back with you, joined by the usual crew in far-flung locations this week. We have from a bunker somewhere in the neighborhood of Forest Hills, Queens, Mike Hogan.
Hello.
And we also have coming from the planet Texas, joining us for a little cameo appearance today, only here for the first 45 minutes of the show before he has to run off on important company business, Jonathon Kinchen. JK, what's the story?
What's popping, my fellas? I was a little bit nervous when Mike had the little 3-second delay. I thought maybe we were having another bathroom emergency.
There may be a bathroom emergency today. That is true, Mike, because, of course, this is the week where the New York City school kids are home. And that means that you and I both are engaged in various degrees of childcare. I'm hoping with a little help from Dora the Explorer that this hour will go smoothly. What for you, Mike? What television program is helping you along today?
Team Umizoomi over here.
Team Umizoomi. Very good, very good. I had an interesting experience with a toddler yesterday. I was inspired by a parent of one of Perrin's classmates last week who told me, to my utter disbelief, that her child knew how to play chess. And so I was inspired and I went out and bought one of those checkers and chess sets and was sitting Perrin down, sort of with the dream, like so many horse players, they start with other games. A love of games seems like a very common thing with horse players, whether they were video game junkies like Jonathon Kinchen, Stratomatic lunatics like me. Before Stratomatic, actually probably concurrent with the early days of Stratomatic, for me, chess was a big part of it. So I figured, you walk before you can run. And we tried to go over the rules of checkers yesterday. I was having a lot of trouble explaining the concept of forwards and backwards to a 4-year-old. Do either of your guys' kids play games, and what kind of games do they play? Mike, we'll start with you.
Puzzles more, like some of those brain teaser kind of things more than chess or checkers or any of that stuff. So he's still a little, not quite 4, so we'll get there soon enough.
How about your guy, JK? Is he a chip off the old block, playing video games like a lunatic, or have you gotten him into any board games?
He plays mind games. That's what he does. A little crazy son of a gun. No, he. We started playing. We played a lot of the Lego adventure games. Like Lego Batman, Lego Marvel Avengers, and it was really cool to see him kind of put things together. Like, Dad, you need to switch to the Incredible Hulk so you can break that wall. Just like really kind of little, like lower level things, but it was just kind of cool to watch him kind of unravel the kind of the strategy part of it. So now he's a full Pokemon master. So that's what he's obsessed with trying to catch them all. So that's kind of his new thing.
That's nice. Well, I think in any case, the game playing, it just teaches strategic thinking. And that's one of the things you're going to need if you're going to try to pick a winner playing the horses once in a while. So I think we're all on the right path. Mike talked about puzzles before. No better puzzle than trying to figure out who's going to win a horse race. And that's one of the things we'll be talking about here on today's show. We're going to do a little bit of recapping of races from the weekend. We have a bunch more excellent questions from the listeners. We'll be going over those as well. And then after JK departs, Mike and I are going to talk a little bit about general ways that you can help prepare for this Triple Crown season of handicapping, and how you might get a jump on some of your competition, especially using some of the tools available from Daily Racing Form. But let's start off, I think the headline from the last few days since our last show, the return to the races of Gunrunner, looking very impressive in the Razorback, earning a 110 Beyer speed figure and looking like a horse who could have been a threat to run second at least in the Pegasus World Cup had he been allowed to run. JK, what did you think of Gunrunner? Jonathan, did we lose you? What's going on? It says you're here.
Oh yeah, sorry, I was just muting. I have a button-up shirt on today for this meeting, and I realized it keeps hitting the microphone, and I felt like you were going to yell at me, so I muted it.
So then I'll yell at you for muting.
Yeah. No, what I was going to say is I think Gunrunner is another example of what we got to see with Frosted and California Chrome last year. It's what happens when you let these horses come back and kind of develop, and I think he's going to have a great year. He's got a little to find still to get to the reigning champion of the division, but it's definitely at least someone that we can throw into the fray that will be involved in some of the big races, and he's in good hands with Steve Asmussen.
That's for sure. Mike Hogan, I'll ask you just point blank. Where do you think this horse would have finished in the Pegasus?
He would have finished second or third. I mean, look, you get him away from the best. You know, you can perform a 110 buyer. You were able to beat Carve and or was Carve in the other race? I don't know, Hawacom or whatever, and Domain's Rap. You know, you can run a 110 buyer. But he was never going to be threatening Arrogant, and I don't even think even with a forward move he'll threaten Arrogant. But he's still, you know, with a lot of the horses that we have left, he's one of the best ones aside from Arrogant that's in training, at least for the older horses.
Now, I didn't do a detailed analysis yet of pace figures in this race. I probably should. I could call up the Timeform US chart function while we're speaking and see. It visually gave the impression of one of those races where he was running faster every eighth or every quarter. I don't know if that's literally true, but it did create quite the visual impression, even though he was alone on the lead. It just, again, going on the visuals here, it seemed like these were at least average fractions early in the race anyway. Do either of you guys have any insight about the race within the race as far as what Gunrunner accomplished the other day?
I'm going to pull it up while we're talking, but until I get to that actual answer, to me, I'm impressed with him because he's one of those horses, a little bit like Arrogant, a little bit like Chrome, where he's not one. You know, he's kind of shown that he's not one dimensional. He can sit off of horses, but also if you jack around and you let him get to the lead, he'll bury you that way. And so, you know, I think those are the most dangerous types of horses that are versatile, that can take advantage of situations as they come. And so, for me, that was the most visually impressive part about it was how he just kind of, you know, loped along and shut off. Timeform has the first 6 furlongs is blue, so it wasn't as if he, you know, he had a testing situation. But the pace figure does increase as he goes to suggest what you were saying, Pete, that he was kind of going faster every eighth.
Interesting. Yeah, but I think, as you point out, he's what our friend Mike Maloney calls a push-button horse, and I'm much more hesitant to give push-button horses negatives, even if the 6 furlong mark in a route is coded blue in Timeform, indicating that it's on the slower side. If it's a push-button horse where I don't think they need to be in the lead to do the real running, I'm much less inclined to downgrade them. Another cool observation I thought Mike Maloney made about Gunrunner was, in many instances, these horses this time of year coming back with bigger goals in mind down the line. These are the kind of horses a lot of players look to bet against. He made the point that he was not interested in spending any money against Gunrunner simply because he knew from the fact that this horse had been pointed toward the Pegasus, ultimately not able to run, but because he'd been pointed to the Pegasus, that he was already in mid-season form and therefore all the more deadly. I just thought that was an interesting observation about that race as well that was worth passing on. There was some other interesting action yesterday at Oaklawn. We had a young 3-year-old break the 100 buyer precipice. Mike Hogan, what do you think? Is One Liner a horse where you're going to be vaulting up your non-existent Derby list?
You know, he was good. He was certainly the most impressive in the race, I think. I do like Petrov a little bit, and I think maybe I need to watch the race a couple more times. I've watched it twice, but the sense that I got was Jose on Petrov felt like he had to beat Uncontested, and once he did, he then all of a sudden realized, wait, there's another horse that's looks pretty good and is going to pass me here. But those two would be the ones I'd want out of that race, and it's Pletcher. If he's able to move forward in his next start, he might be a big contender. And we talked about maybe Pletcher changing a little bit of his tactics of getting these 3-year-olds ready for the Derby. He's a lightly raced horse. It seems to have some upside. So I don't see why he's not one of the top contenders at this point.
JK, what were your thoughts on One-Liner?
Well, I had this great story I was going to tell about what a good friend of mine, Nick Tamaro, said I was going to give him credit for it. And then I heard what the buyer was, and then I didn't know now I don't know what the hell I'm going to say. So I'm just going to tell you the Nick story, and then I'm going to say but. So the Nick story was, Nick made a really good point. I think it's a great handicapping point in general, is that when you're watching a race and a horse is being asked much earlier than you would like for that horse to be asked, but then they extend and win, kind of easy in the end, it's really a bad indictment for the rest of the horses in that field. And if you watch that race, One-Liner was asked to keep up early, and then he was asked earlier than you would like for a horse that ends up winning by 3 to be asked. So I was ready to just kind of write the race off and be like, not very good. Look at this horse. He's all in, at the half mile pole. And then, he gets a 102 buyer, and a buyer that, Nick's involvement with the buyer team, a buyer that Nick said, there's really no getting around it. It's kind of real. It can't really be any slower than that.
No.
There were so many mile and 16th races on the day that's really, it helps them it's a good indicator of making a figure like that. And that's what it comes back. And that's pretty impressive. So good for Winstar and the China Horse Club. But I'm going to reserve judgment for another race. I've, like I said on the last show, I try to do that now with these Derby preps. You don't have to fall in love yet. There's going to be much better value against this horse in the Rebel or wherever he shows up. So just hold on to your horses a little bit and see what happens.
Hold on to those metaphorical horses. But yeah, Nick's point about the speed figure, you take a look here. I happen to have the charts right up in front of me. Gun Runner finishes in 140.97 and One-Liner 141.85. So, I mean, that's not a bad comparison for a horse, for a young improving 3-year-old versus a in fine fettle legit grade 1 horse in Gun Runner. It certainly is optimistic. I agree with that visual observation that he was being pressed on early. But one thing that came to my mind, and I don't know, sometimes I come up with these things from following racing around the world, and sometimes I think the examples are relevant, and sometimes I think they're irrelevant, and I don't know which is which in this case. But they do say in jump racing in the UK, a lot of times these horses who come off the bridle early but have stamina and they just keep finding. And it doesn't always look pretty, but you'll find a lot of these horses who can pull out a lot more than you'd think. It did make me wonder, wouldn't that be a quality I'd want in a 3-year-old who, in the big test of his early career, is going to be asked to go 10 furlongs in the Kentucky Derby? It occurred to me, I wasn't sure if it was, I can't exactly call it a positive, but I'm not sure if it's a negative either. A lot more to be determined, but certainly an impressive performance on the clock. We talked very briefly about Uncontested. Disappointment of the race, sent off at just about even money, and to my eye, just ran like a horse who didn't want to go that far. Is there anything more? Were there any excuses that I missed with Uncontested, or do you think he'll continue on the trail, or is he going to be looking at other goals at this point? JK, what do you think?
I had a very trusted note from a very trusted eye that horse needed to cut back. And I had that note before the Smarty Jones when the horse ran off the screen. I think that was circumstantial with the slop and with the conditions and kind of being loose out there to its own devices, and maybe Petrov not liking that surface as much. So, I'm fine with that horse cutting back, and I don't think I need him moving forward.
Mike, you pretty much already.
And Pete.
Yes, please.
Real quick. I think we had this conversation before, and if it wasn't you, it was someone else. That I keep on wanting to call Uncontested a her, and I figured out why. It's because Baffert had a female horse that was good named Contested, right?
That sounds right. I will look that up right now, but that sounds right. There definitely was a horse with a similar name who was a good filly.
Yeah, I keep calling him a her, and I take that personally, and it was been bothering me.
I don't think he's hung up on these normative views of gender. He's okay with it. I wouldn't worry about it too much. Yeah, indeed, Contested was a bay filly of Baffert's who won the test among and the Acorn as well back in 2012, not that long ago. So yeah, so you're forgiven, JK, for getting little things wrong. Oh, speaking of getting little things wrong, here's a tangent out of nowhere. Poor Travis Stone. Did you hear? Did you? I feel like I shouldn't even give the haters any credit, but I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there. Did you see the guff the poor man got for mispronouncing DeGrom yesterday at Aqueduct?
I saw it in our group text, and then I saw it on Twitter. Travis takes his craft very seriously, and he just doesn't. Look, there's a lot of things he would tell people to go to heck about. The morning line being one of them. When it comes to his race calling, he wants to be perfect, and that's just the kind of person he is, and so I don't see what the big deal is, but I can understand why it bothered him as much as it did.
Pretty silly stuff. A lot of odd chatter on Twitter these days, and one of you guys wanted to get into it though. One more note on Uncontested. We did just get a question from one wag on Twitter. Just came in asking JK, is he a one-turn horse?
Absolutely. I believe he probably is a one-turn horse. She is a one-turn horse.
Now you're going to get us all confused. Which one of you guys wanted to talk Twitter for a few minutes?
I think it was Jonathon.
I think it was a little. Yeah. Well, I think it's a little bit of. Look, I just find it very curious how. Well, first thing I like to think, and I don't mean to antagonize the trolls, but how brave people get on Twitter to me is really funny. Because in a normal situation, half the stuff these people say from behind their keyboard, they would never say it in real life. And I just find that kind of hilarious. But to me, and I here's what I struggle with, and this is more or less a therapy session.
That's cool. We can do that for you.
I struggle with the idea of don't feed the squirrels, don't feed the birds. Because if you're at a picnic area and you're feeding them, then they'll just keep coming back for food.
Correct.
I have a problem with it.
Stuff. I think you guys are both nuts to the degree with which you interact with some people who I love interacting with people who are being civil on Twitter. But if you want to go left, I'm not going to tell you what a dork you are. That's obvious to the world. I'm going to move on to the next thing. I know you and Mike both have slightly different attitudes about this.
Well, there's certain times, right? Like the idiot last week. Like I was hanging out with my son, so like everything he said was like kind of wrong, and like he didn't make any sense. That I didn't want to I wanted to sit down and like 7 tweet respond to him about how dumb he was, but instead I was just like, I think I just said like, yes sir, like you got it, buddy, whatever, you know what I mean? Like, but I struggle with it. It's hard because by nature I'm kind of like, I told you this is a therapy session. By nature I'm the last word guy. Like I've been that way my whole life. Like I just got to get the last word in an argument, and I've tried to improve on that, and so it makes it difficult with Twitter. I just don't understand how some people can be so damn grumpy all the time and be so cynical about everything and have this intense need to like prove that someone else is wrong. Like that's why we play this game, because you can bet. You know what I mean? Like if you're so smart, why do you want to make me smarter? Like why don't you just like beat me in the pools? You know, I don't know. It's bizarre to me, and so I just wanted to say don't feed the birds, and I needed to say it out loud so that I don't do it.
Now, Mike, you have a different approach. I've never seen you antagonize a difficult person on Twitter, but you have a very different approach than what I do. Well, tell us a little bit about your theory about it.
Well, for me, I mean, look, we're all horse players, so we have that common bond at least amongst each other. Regardless of whether or not we're going to be civil, we at least enjoy something that, let's face it, a large percentage of the public just aren't involved in. So I always feel like we're coming at it from a place of community in a way. And if you get outright mean or difficult, then I'll move on and drop it. But I will give.
Do you block anybody?
I don't block. I just ignore. I mean, there's no point in blocking, really. I don't think, because really, what is blocking? Blocking isn't so much. Blocking is really more about me than about them. You know what I mean? Blocking is like arrogance, in my opinion, because blocking is saying, I am so important that you can't see what I say. Because it's not about like they can't communicate with you. It's that they can't see anything that you put out there. And I don't really care to get, in that sort of battle with anybody. It's fine. If they want to see and respond to me, that's okay. I just won't respond back to them. But I just figure, I've had some discussions with people that came off at first as complete jerks and then went totally 180, and I learned something and they learned something, and that's sort of my approach. I'll give them a couple times, and then after that, if it still continues and they're basically just a negative nihilist, then I don't have any time for you. But that's we're all friends in a way. It was sounding like an after school. It was sounding like an after school special until you got to the negative nihilist part. But
Pete, you just block, huh?
No, he just ignores. He said he doesn't block.
No, I'm saying
what I
do.
I don't block because blocking gives the satisfaction of them knowing that you thought enough about them to block them. Because then they go and they see they blocked you. They take a screenshot. They say, "Oh, I'm so hurt. This jerk blocked me," and you just let them continue to try. You mute. What you do is you mute, and then you don't see it. It's the easiest way to pretend that you don't exist. If somebody else says, "Hey, remember that troll? They actually said something interesting," you can go back. You can unmute. They're none the wiser. You don't give them the satisfaction. That's my personal theory of navigating trolls. Now, I didn't catch the specific incident last week, JK. I did see one person who I won't name who did make a point about some of the betting strategy stuff we discussed that I do want to follow up on. I don't know if that person is a troll or was just being a little aggressive. But what was without giving too much away, what were you being castigated for?
No, I was like, I don't even, like, honestly, I was driving, so I don't even really remember, but it was something along the lines of just breaking down word for word and dissecting what we talked about in 45 seconds.
Right.
Talking about exacta boxes. 8 minutes before, I said how exacta boxes were the worst bet you could make. And then I said, there's nothing worse in horseplay than playing an exacta box where the first two choices win. And then he the person, he or she, I don't know, because it's one of those alias people, pointed out that that didn't make sense.
Yeah, well, let's follow up on that a little. Let's segue this into talking betting strategy, because that's worth following up on. I mean, to me, there's this, I believe the critique was that theoretically, you talked about Dutching, right? Where you talk about playing the horses you like in an exacta or double combination and betting the lower paying ones more times. And the reason you do that is because you're taking, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're taking sort of a bigger approach about your opinion of the race that's rooted less in the specific value of each combination and more in your faith in your picks to do well. So if you're right about a race, you want to look at overall what you're investing in the total race versus the amount of money you're going to get back in the total race. So in other words, let's say, I'm just going to make up some numbers here. Let's say we're keying the 1-2 over the 1-2-3-4. And we think that absolutely is going to lock up this race. And we know from looking at the probables or having software that examines the probables for us, that you can make that exacta combination and get 120% return on your money. That's the number you're looking at. And to assure that 120% return on your money, you might have to bet that $18 combination that's theoretically not a lot of value more times, because you're looking to make this play make sense in aggregate. So really what you're doing is the way that I look at what you described, Jonathan, it's very sophisticated and smart, playing the game on a whole other level than somebody that's just looking and saying, well, the 1-3 exacta 18, that's not very good. I mean, to me, that's sort of missing the forest for the trees, the bigger picture of wagering strategy and bet structure that you're putting forth. Is that, am I accurately describing your thought process? Is there more to add to that?
No, you actually saved me having to do it. I mean, I don't know. Like, I would just tell everyone to rewind that and listen to what you said again. I think it was perfect. Like, the thing about it is there's certain ways to play the game, right? I mean, there's like kind of more of the kill shot, and there's just kind of more of the churn and pick up some coins along the way shot, you know. And that's what the Dutch is. It's not designed to maximize your opinion. It's designed to take a solid opinion of a race and pick up some chips. And there's a difference there. You know what I mean? Like, if you like the 1 and the 2, and that's who you like the most, the idea that you like the 1 and the 2 equally, and you want to bet them equally, considering they're probably a different price. The 1 is 2-1 and the 2 is 7-1. I just call BS on that. Like, I can't see how you can say that those are equally, you believe that those have an equal shot of winning. And so instead of what most people do, which is betting a $10 exacta box, 1-2 with 1, 2, 3, 4, all I'm saying is that, and then you hope that the 7-1 shot wins. All we're doing is saying that the 1 of the 2 are going to win, and whichever one of them wins, we're going to get the same return we're getting the same return back. So, I mean, it's kind of like arguing, and this is just to kind of put some light on the situation. It's kind of like arguing with Mike about Songbird's percentage in the Breeders' Cup distaff. It's kind of like arguing with someone about the sun being green. You know, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, I do think if you scratch the surface of it, there is something to explain about the difference between the sort of selection-oriented approach, big picture, looking at value in aggregate, versus just looking at the specific value of certain combinations. And I do think, well, I mean, let's face it, most of the money going in the pools, the money bet by the computer players we've talked about so much lately, those machines are just, algorithms are just looking for certain combinations that pay more than they theoretically should. But, you know, we're not computers, and I don't think that I'm not interested in trying to do a worse version of what a computer can do. I'm interested in taking an approach that comes naturally to me, honed over decades of playing the horses, and try to eke out value that way. Mike Hogan, what are your thoughts, generally speaking, on this difference between value-oriented handicapping and selection-oriented handicapping?
Well, you know, Jonathan talks sometimes about making them pay, or making your opinions, you know, crushing their souls. Okay, there's a difference between that and what Jonathan's talking about in terms of Dutching. And I would even say, and I said there was a discussion that I saw on Twitter recently where Ruben, one of our regular listeners, said he was alive to like 7 horses ending in a pick 4, and then he hedged to the other 3. So he ended up effectively locking in a profit of $600. And somebody said, you should rethink that over time because it's not a smart approach. And, you should use your stronger opinions. And that's when you're really going to make money at the game. And I would say, yes, they're both right, because in a situation like that where Ruben had gone 7 deep in the last, he was essentially saying, I don't have a strong opinion in this race. My stronger opinions laid elsewhere earlier in the sequence, and he got alive with his stronger opinions to something that was paying quite well. And he ended in a race where he didn't clearly have a very strong opinion. So I think that is the key. And I think that's sort of the theme and the difference between what Jonathan's talking about when he talks about crushing their soul and eking out a profit through Dutching, is determine what situation you're in and what kind of opinion you have, and then use that in order to bet smartly and make a profit based on it.
Lots of good stuff to pick up on there, Mike. If we're talking about the Ruben, I think we're talking about excellent guy. And the last thing I want to do is impugn his strategy there. But I will just suggest that I'm going to take a guess. Maybe there wasn't, but I'm going to guess if the opinion in the last was really that there was no opinion, that there might have been a better bet than whichever bet he chose to leverage that idea, that handicapping idea that caused him to make that wager. As for me, I'm not interested. There are hedges I'll make, and we've described them on this show. There was that pick six when I was in the UK, JK, that we played, and we left out a horse in the last leg that we'd wanted to play. And then when that race comes up, I have no problem betting that horse to win because he was part of our initial opinion of the race. But I'm not interested in doing is going against my opinion of the race, betting horses I left out. Maybe Ruben wanted to play all originally and had to cut down to 7. And then I would say that makes more sense, but I'd question the choice of pool. What do you think?
Well, you mean the 2-horse Lucky Brian at Santa Anita on the grass?
Jeez, you've got a pretty good memory, my friend.
Well, because it stings. It still hurts.
We should have caught 17 times and we caught 2.
Here's the problem. What just to your point, what you're saying, and look, Ruben, I do this literally 17 times a day. Is that am I allowed to say literally in that situation?
It's not great, but it's better than some of the ones you've busted out lately.
Okay, I do that all the time.
Grammar
it's like
off the clock here.
Why not play the pick 3 if you don't have an opinion in the last?
Right.
I have to ask myself that all the time, and I have to remember it's like, why not just play the pick 3?
Yeah, right. The more efficient you can do, more efficiently you can express your opinion, the better you are, right, Mike?
Sure. And the worst I see is that someone will go all in the first leg of a pick 5 when the second leg of a pick 5 starts the pick 4.
It'd be very rare that would. I mean, there might be a situation where that.
But
rare.
So we don't get assaulted via social media. Look, I understand the answer, right? It's because there's that perception that there's extra meat on the bone in the pick 5. The pool is bigger. There's more inefficient money in that pool. The reward is larger. I get all of that. I get all that as the answer. But to me, playing all and hoping for a long shot rather than just play the pick 3 and play it for more, and you'll probably end up in the same place. You know what I mean? At least I would think so.
All right, we got a couple other questions from readers. I did want to loop back and just very quickly give credit to you guys. You gave out a couple of winners. No prices that are going to change any lives, but nice work on Tiger Blood and Moment of Delight on the last show. I had made fun of us recently after a cold spell, so I thought we should give some props. The other interesting thing I thought to come out of our conversation from last show about the public handicapper races, we talked about Imperial Hint, who Jonathon was worried was going to get a rail trip, and I had brought up the idea, hey, will Pimentel be aware of the track bias and ride the horse accordingly? How'd that turn out, JK?
He did know. He never came inside the 3-path, and so not to say that that's the reason that he won.
He was probably winning anyway, but the ride was the right ride.
The ride was the right ride, and I think that when you see people like myself, in times I try to do it a little bit more privately, but like Duke and some of these other guys who get very frustrated with the rides they get, it's just the idea that that's what you do for a living, and we would just like more often than not to see you act accordingly to what gives you the best chance to be successful. Now, look, I've never sat on a horse except for that one time in Puerto Vallarta, and I get it. But and I know that they're going to make mistakes. Yeah, there is. I tweeted it actually. There's mistakes that are going to happen. There's you're sitting on 1,000-pound animals and they weigh 120 and they're going 40 miles per hour and their lives are in danger. So mistakes are going to happen. But it's just when things like that happen. Kendrick Carmouche is a great example with some of the rail situations that happened at Aqueduct over the weekend. It felt like he was aware of it before other people were, and I commend that.
Following riders and riders who are attuned with bias can be a powerful angle. And Laurel's a particularly interesting laboratory because every pro horse player you talk to says about how biases today are much less prevalent than they once were. But it does seem that Laurel is a place that gets that dead rail rally wide situation happening a lot. So it's really good to know when you have a rider who could be attuned to that. Imperial Hint, pretty strong buyer speed figure there. Came back with a 105. Very nice effort all the way around. Mike, you have any thoughts on anything from any of the PH races before we move on to some reader questions here?
No, I think as much as anything, yeah, I gave out Tiger Blood. He didn't pay all that much. I actually thought he would pay a little bit better than he did. But I think more proud of that, as I was proud, Jonathan and I both gave out Moment of Delight. I knew we weren't getting anything close to the 6-1, and so I think that's the other thing I want to talk about is as a horse player, you got to be smart. I mean, I see sometimes people are like, oh, geez, that 4-1, that I thought I'd get, and the horse opened 6-5. Just be smart. Realize if this horse has the top figures, is dropping out of a stakes race, getting class relief. Like, you're not going to get, regardless of whether or not the morning line says 6-1 or 8-1 or even 4-1, just be smart. You're looking at the favorite.
Yeah, it is one of those things. It's an art that you really need to get attuned to, and various strategies in terms of trying to get alive. As Mike, as you said before in the show, in the blind pools, that can be a terrific way of trying to preserve as much of the value as possible. JK, apparently he muted and then dropped off the call. The helicopter arrived outside his window, and like a superhero, he leapt into the cockpit, and he's off to his all-important business meeting, probably having a mimosa while he's doing it. So we'll hear from him again on Friday. Mike and I will take you the rest of the way for the next 23 minutes. And the first topic that I want to touch on comes from our friend Marshall Graham, friend of the podcast. And he wants to ask, I'd be curious to get JK's thoughts on this. Maybe we'll bring it back when he's back Friday. But Mike, we'll see if you have any advice for Marshall. How do you determine if a horse is a sprinter or router? This is especially relevant given the time of the year with all these 3-year-olds stretching out. Of course, he understands the importance of pedigree, but is there anything else visually that you look for, or any other clues? You have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, visually, certainly. And this is where I rely on people that are much better than me at judging a horse in the flesh. And we talked on the podcast about really good ones. Maggie Wolfendale, of course. Gabby is very good as well. Tom Quigley. There are people who are very smart at seeing a horse and knowing, look, that is more of a sprinter build or more of a router build. And you probably have a better sense of it than I do, but generally the sense I get is that taller, leggier ones tend to be more route types, and the shorter, stockier quarter horse builds are more the sprinters. So first off, from a visual standpoint, just determine, does this horse look like they want to run all day, or does this horse look like they've got just powerful short burst of energy, burst of speed?
That sounds like a pretty good description. That idea, the phrase Maggie Wolfendale always uses is a horse who's built downhill, indicating one who's more likely to be a sprinter. And then there's also, you were talking about people who are good judges of horse flesh. I just wanted to throw Kate and Bradar's name in that group as well, as somebody whose opinion I would trust and put into my notes. I would imagine there are some subtler ways from looking at energy distribution and pace figures. I personally am not really an expert in using pace figures to try to determine proclivities for sprinting versus routing, but that's a topic that maybe is worth bringing up with Craig Milkowski in a future seminar for Timeform. Which I just wanted to say to folks, thank you so much for all the comments we've received on the webinar we did last week. Mike, what kind of reaction have you gotten on that?
A lot of people really liked it, and I learned a lot from just talking with you and Mark about it. I've seen people, for better or worse, I am the one whose email goes out on all of those webinar invites. And so I will get responses from people who, frankly, I don't even know how they've learned to get an email account, because I can't even understand what they're trying to say in response to the email. But the flip side of that is I get some very, very nice comments from people who took the time, they watched it, they rewatched it, they learned a lot, they have very, very nice things to say. And sometimes they'll even talk about how, I used the product and it allowed me to qualify for this contest, or I took down a big try because of it. Those are the kind of nice things to see, and seen a lot, actually, frankly, seen a lot of it since the webinar we did with Mark.
Yeah, there was some NHC qualification. There was a big pick 3 that was hit. There was all this cool stuff. I thought it was neat, and it made me think that perhaps we should try to have another show soon, where we go over either similar material or maybe talk about some more advanced strategies that folks can use when it comes to time form.
Yeah, I'd like to do, we're doing these webinars usually every other week or so, sometimes more often when there's big races. But with the Timeform, now that we've got a partnership with Timeform US, I would love to do one with them, once a month, once every other month at least, because there's so much we can talk about and so many different ways to use the product and to use it in conjunction with the DRF products. So.
Absolutely. I saw a fancy new quote as part of the Daily Racing Form marketing materials with none other than Naira's Andy Serling talking about how using the two products together forms a key cornerstone of his handicapping. And we'll have to I'll have to try to remember to email or tweet at Craig with that idea if there's anything in pace figures that he uses to guess about how far horses want to run, and maybe we can follow up with that question from Marshall about with that information at some later point. Did you see any questions you felt like answering, Mike, that have come in over the transom in the last few days?
Well, we did have somebody asking about bridge jumping. There was a bridge jumper earlier in the card at Laurel, and I don't remember exactly the horse ended up being off the board and triggering some big show prices. In one, it was probably like the 5th or 6th race at Laurel on Saturday. And so he just wanted to talk a little bit and ask about bridge jumping. And Pete, I know you've been talking a lot with Mike Maloney, and Mike has told some stories about knowing bridge jumpers in the past. The listener had a question just about the mentality of somebody that would take $10,000 or $50,000 and put it to show on a horse. Do you have any insight on that?
I mean, I think I understand the basic attraction, right? And the idea is that they're trying to ascribe a certainty in a very uncertain game, and they're letting the math affect that maybe too by saying, okay, there are certain events that are more than 95% likely to happen, and therefore my 5% return on investment is worth it. Now, when you say it like that, it actually sounds okay. But in the real world, in horse racing, with all the things that can go wrong, finding those opportunities, I've never met anybody who was able to do it. And right. It's not, the other thing is somebody might say, oh, but what about with a rebate? Okay, that's a good thought. But from my understanding, most rebate shops and places that will offer you rebates won't do them in these situations where there's a minus pool. Right. In other words, just to explain the basics of bridge jumping, the theory is regardless of what is bet in the show pool, the track has to pay out $2.10, and in some places still, I believe it's $2.20.
Yep, West Virginia.
Yeah.
Right.
So with $2.20, I could almost make the case that it comes into play as it's a lot more viable at $2.20 than it is at $2.10. Let's put it that way, because when you're betting enough money on it, the return is obviously double, significantly more. But I believe that in those minus pool situations, a lot of places won't give you your rebate. So that takes that out of the equation as a possible reason why folks are doing it. So that's the best idea I have, though, just trying to ascribe certainty in an uncertain world.
I'll say this, and believe me, I'm not making the case for bridge jumping, and I'm not making the case for that to say it's even a smart wager. But we talked about Gunrunner. Gunrunner was 1-5 to win against 5 other horses yesterday. Okay. So if you figure, look, I think he's by far the best. And there were a lot of people, even if they didn't do it as a win bet, a lot of people who singled Gunrunner in various win pools or pick 3 or 4 or 5 pools. That is essentially I mean, you don't know exactly what it is, but maybe you're getting at most 2 to 5 in the pick 5 pool on Gun Runner. Okay, so if you're saying that is a bet that I'm willing to make, I guess it's not a bridge too far to say, look, for him to only beat 4 horses and finish third, and you get 5% return. I guess you can kind of make that leap, maybe. No?
Yeah, I think that the problem is, though, that I think, and I don't have all the particulars on this, but I think in a rebate world, you can get that 1 to 5 in a non-minus. Obviously, it's not a minus pool, so therefore you're able to get that much more money back. So I think it's effectively the difference between those two numbers. I think is more. I got to do a little bit of research about that.
I'm not even talking rebates. I'm just talking like general logic, I guess.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, like, when you say it, it sounds okay for a second, but when you examine the long-term math of it, I mean, it's just very hard.
Right.
It's very hard to construct a successful betting strategy where you can never be wrong, where you're not giving yourself room to be wrong. Because we see in life, and especially at the racetrack, there is just crazy crap that happens all the time. And while I probably am more comfortable at the lower end of the odds spectrum in a lot of exotic scenarios, for me, that idea is indeed a bridge jump too far.
Oh, I see what you did there. Yes.
I deserve to be made fun of for that. Thank you.
Literally, you do.
Oh, don't go there. One of these days, I'll really get on my grammar high horse and talk about what that word should mean.
I know.
It's not going to be today. It's not going to be today. We got a few minutes left today, Mike, and I wanted to there's one more horse I wanted to talk about on the Triple Crown Trail who I didn't believe JK had much to say about, so I was saving it until he was off the show to bring him up. And it's this Japanese horse, Epicharis, who you mentioned a long time ago. I assume you initially mentioned fueled by the fervor that our friend and colleague Dan Illman seems to have for this horse. I believe a future wager at big odds has been purchased by Dan Illman on Epicharis. Tell me everything you know about this horse, including what he was up to last weekend.
Well, so, and the reason why Dan even alerted me to the horse, I think after either his maiden win or his second win. He's now 4 for 4, made his 3-year-old debut on, Sunday night in the U.S., Monday morning or Saturday. I don't even know time-wise when it was, but it was sometime over the weekend in Japan. And the reason why Dan even had this horse on his radar is because of the change that's happened this year for the Triple Crown points. And now there is the race that Epicharis, I don't even know how you say it, the race that he won, the Hyacinth, is essentially a win and you're in for the Kentucky Derby, that the winner of it earns enough Triple Crown points that they get an invitation, if he's healthy and interested, will run in the Kentucky Derby. He's assured a starting spot. So back in October, when Dan heard this, Dan started thinking like a value bettor. Okay, he said, look, whoever this Japanese horse is probably going to be about 30 to 1 as a win bet in the Derby. That's what Lonnie was. You look at some of the UAE Derby winners, they're generally around that price. And so he's saying, okay, if I can identify who the most likely horse to win this prep would be, and I put a future wager on him at 150 or 200 to 1, then I'm getting, and this is exactly what happened with Dan, I'm getting 200 to 1 on a horse that's odds on to win the lone win and you're in to enter the Derby. So I'm taking 1 to 5 and 30 to 1 and turning it into 200 to 1. So good on you, Dan. I wasn't smart enough to do it. I thought about doing it. I ultimately couldn't pull the trigger. But Dan's sitting on a future wager on Epicharis, he's guaranteed to run if he wants to.
Let's go with We'll go with Epicharis. I'll check that.
Okay.
But we'll just, rather than pronouncing it twice every time. The question for you. You mentioned, of course, whether or not he's going to be healthy. We don't have any knowledge on that. Have we heard anything from the connections? Is it definitely the plan to go to Kentucky? Are they thinking UAE first and then Kentucky. What do we know about Epicharis' future plans at this point?
Yeah, the Derby is absolutely on their radar. I just saw a little article where they said he may run in Dubai, but it's all kind of open. They do want to run him in the U.S. Maybe they could even run him a prep here first. It doesn't have to be a points race. He's already guaranteed a spot, so he could run in. I don't know if they would even card some sort of overnight stakes for him. But I know that it is on the radar, and all things being equal, we'll see him on the first Saturday in May.
The other really interesting point that Dan made was comparing the merits of this horse vis-a-vis Lonnie. Lonnie was not particularly, comparatively, Epicharis is thought much better of than Lonnie was at a comparable stage. And Lonnie, as we saw, despite, shall we say, being a little distracted and having other issues, form wasn't all that bad. Was beaten 10 lengths in one of the Triple Crown races. I mean, it wasn't. Right. And the idea was that Lonnie then went back, and this is, again, really just stealing from Dan in the conversation we had at Todd Unger's going away party last week. These aren't my original thoughts. The idea that Lonnie would go back to Japan and be a huge long shot. It wasn't like he's some special horse. And meanwhile, here you have Epicharis, who looks legitimately special in their racing with an opportunity. That was the part that really caught my mind. But just because a horse is 30-1 doesn't mean he should be 30-1. But then when you make that relative point about the merits of distracted Lonnie versus potentially professional and several lengths better Epicharis, is he 10 lengths better? Maybe. It's I sure wouldn't mind holding a 200-1 ticket to find out. So that's sort of a fun story of a stranger that we're going to be following as the Triple Crown Trail moves on. But one thing I wanted to do today, Mike, you have one more point on him?
Well, the other thing I was going to say in comparison to Lonnie is Epicharis. Is that how you decided to say it? He's got a lot more positional speed than Lonnie ever had. Lonnie is a plotter. Lonnie showed it in his races over here. Even when he was hitting the board, I think he hit the board in the Belmont. His style isn't necessarily conducive to U.S. racing. Epicharis has got speed. Epicharis can sit and finish. He can take the lead. He can go wire to wire. If you haven't watched his races, find him online. He's worth watching, and I think his style will translate.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm looking here. Is this right? How far was Lonnie beaten in the Belmont? This doesn't look right what I'm looking at.
I don't know. I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, this isn't correct. But anyway, he was third, and he was within apparently 5 lengths in the Preakness, and the 10-length number I cited was from the Derby. So I mean, we're not talking about all that much improvement when you think about it. So anyway, will be kind of a fun horse to follow along. I'm sure we'll have plenty of opportunities to talk about him, get JK's take as well. But speaking of the Triple Crown Trail, I just wanted to spend the last few minutes of the show today talking about different ways players might endeavor to follow along any of the special tools and or products that Daily Racing Form offers to help folks stay attuned with everything going on in these Triple Crown races, features and products, I should say. And who better than DRF's Director of Product Marketing, Mike Hogan, to talk to us about what some of those things are and maybe even give some of his personal ideas for following the Triple Crown Trail.
Well, it depends on what level of fan you are, of course. I mean, in most of the people listening to the podcast, I would assume are regular horse players who at least will handicap the weekend races and, maybe watch races regularly. But there are some people, and maybe there are some listeners who really only tune in about this time of year and they follow through the Derby, and then they kind of maybe take a back seat. Maybe they pay attention a little around the Breeders' Cup, and that's about it. For players like that, the Derby package is a good one. You get a certain number of PPs that you can use for the Derby preps, and then of course you get a card for the Kentucky Derby itself. There's a Derby guide that comes out each week that you and I are both involved in creating content for, that you get access to. So that's a nice way to do it if you're not playing the races every weekend and you're not buying one of those unlimited or multi-card packs. The other thing I'll say is, of course, every week Mike Watchmaker and Jay Privman do their Derby Watch. That's free. That's on DRF.com. And all of the analysis post-race is all free. Privman will do his recap and go through and really write up on every horse in every one of the Derby preps, how they ran, how their trip was, what he thinks of them going forward. So that stuff, no barrier to entry. You should be going back every week after the races and reading the stuff that they do.
That's a great idea. You mentioned that the Derby guide that we're part of, I did not exactly cover myself in glory. I believe my comment on the winner, Zakharov, was the first horse you throw out.
Yes. Well, in the El Camino Real, I will say in your defense, I don't think that is going to be a predictive race going forward of any of the Triple Crown winners this year. But
no, but it's always humiliating when you spend 3 hours handicapping a race and come up with a line like that and then see the thing win at 48-1. I would have needed 480-1 personally, but these things happen. But I think you mentioned a lot of great points there. Watch and Privman do such a great job. One other idea I had that I'm going to just do personally, and maybe this is the kind of thing where folks listening are going to want to do this too, or maybe they're going to say, Pete, I'm glad you're doing the work so we don't have to, is I do want to create a prep race spreadsheet just to have all in one place my thoughts on the Derby preps with information like the buyer figure, like the time form figure, perhaps my own assessment of the figure if I have time to go through, my thoughts on the bias on the days those races took place, go through the charts and come up with an idea of how I thought the track was playing, analysis of the pace scenario, troubled trips, just to have sort of one document with all my stuff staring me in the face to get a little bit of a jump on things and just have my own personal database of Triple Crown stuff. Is there anything else you do, Mike, in particular? You know, we're going to have this cutthroat competition coming up. Possibly you, me, JK. Who knows? Maybe we'll even let Sumja and Chris Larmy back into the fold. There's a lot of pressure. Is there anything special you're doing in your handicapping to try to give you an edge for some of the punditry you have to do on the Triple Crown side?
Well, what I would say, and this is obviously we're both formulator people. We both use formulator notes. If you have any formulator account, even a 2-card plan or 5-card plan, go in to one of the cards you use, pull up the race charts for every one of the Triple Crown preps and write notes for those horses so that when they come back on the first Saturday in May, your PPs will have all of your notes in there for every one of the runners. And that gives information that nobody else has because it's your own assessment of what you thought for every runner in every one of the Triple Crown races. You know, and it doesn't take that long. You know, it was 2 races this weekend, 2 or 3 the weekend before. We'll get a few, but it maybe takes a half hour. You watch the races, you make notes for the horses, and boom, it helps you out immensely.
That's actually a great idea, and I think it's a great entree into trip handicapping, maybe for people who the idea of tripping every race on a circuit seems like just way too much an amount of work to ever do. Right. You're only talking about doing a couple of races. Now, right. Granted, if you want to incorporate some thought on the bias, you're going to be looking at more than a couple of races. But even if all you're doing is going through, looking at pace scenarios, looking for subtle trouble, looking for obvious trouble, and putting that all in your notes and formulator, that might be a great way to get you started. And who knows, right. if you take to it, it's something that could become a powerful help to you in your handicapping every day. As Mike points out, there's nothing quite like having your own subjective view of the race right there in the PPs the next time these horses come back. And that's something that Formulator lets you easily accomplish. So that's something you might want to think about doing as well. We are just about out of time here, Mike. Any final thoughts or other things to mention?
We didn't get a chance to talk about Epicharis and whether or not people think that the Japanese horse even should get into the Kentucky Derby. Maybe we should save that one for next time because I have some thoughts on it, and I got into it a little bit with some folks on Twitter about it.
Oh, interesting. Let's put a pin in that. We'll bring it back for Friday. If folks have questions for Friday, come and ask us. We talked so much about Twitter, we didn't give our Twitter handles. @LoomsBoldly. Mike can be found. The best one I would say is @DRF Hogan, but you're also going to want to follow @DRF Formulator. You can get the kid at UT Big Hair. And an array of interesting DRF Twitter handles to follow. If you do a little bit of poking around online, look at who we follow. You'll probably get some pretty good ideas straight away. If you have questions, hit us up there or via email, podcast@drf.com. I want to thank JK for his cameo. I want to thank Mike Hogan, as always, the guys in the studio, especially AJ, putting the show together today. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale. We'll be back on Friday. May you win all your photos.